Let's explore further into the world of knots with the knot of the week. This week's knot is the bowline. The video you're watching is a small excerpt from the curriculum at Knot School. I hope you enjoy it. The bowline is often described as a very ancient knot, and in fact, it is often one of the first knots taught in many outdoor programs. The bowline is a type of knot known as a loop knot. Loop knots are knots that are tied to create a fixed, non-adjustable loop or multiple loops in a rope. There are two types of loop knots. There are loop knots that are tied at the end of a line and also mid-line loop knots. The bowline is an example of an end-of-line loop knot. However, there are other bowline variations, including the bowline on a bight, which is a mid-line loop. The bowline doesn't have any alternative names. However, there are various versions of the bowline, and each of those variations has its own name for identification purposes. Within the structure of the bowline, we find the same structure as the sheep end. In fact, we could consider that the sheep end is the foundation knot for the bowline. However, the bowline has many different variations, and so we can consider the bowline also a foundation knot. Some examples of bowline variations are the Cowboy Bowline, the bowline on a bight, and the Eskimo Bowline, to name just a few. There are a few different methods to tie the bowline. The most common way when we first learn it uses a moniker of a rabbit jumping up through its hole, around a tree, and then back down its hole again. So to tie the bowline, begin by forming a loop. From there, take your working end and pass it up through the loop, then around and behind the standing part, and then back down through the loop again. From there, cinch up the knot. Another faster method of tying the bowline is called the one-handed bowline. And of the one-handed bowlines, there are a couple ways to tie it. I'll show you the easiest. The trick to tying the one-handed bowline is to position the working line so that it's between your index and your middle finger when you begin. From there, you simply trace out the path that the rope would take as you would tie the bowline. There is another way to tie the bowline, which I find quite interesting, and this time we begin by tying a noose. Once we have our noose tied, we then take the tail end and pass it through the loop, then cinch up the knot and allow it to capsize on itself. And there we have another bowline knot. You can find the bowline in use in a lot of different applications, including by arborists in boating and sailing, in camping, climbing, and home and garden applications. Practically anywhere you need a simple loop knot. Despite the bowline having an excellent reputation, there is the danger that the bowline could slip, especially when the knot is not loaded or when the knot's tied in modern synthetic materials such as Dyneema or Spectra. One of the easiest ways to make the bowline more secure is to add a half hitch by simply taking the tail end and tying a half hitch around the one side of the loop. Backing up the bowline will reduce the risk of the knot slipping when tension is lost. You can find the bowline as knot number 287 on page 49, number 1010 on page 186, and number 1716 on page 295 of the Ashley Book of Knots. Learning knots can be challenging and rewarding. If you'd like to develop some skills and learn knots, then I recommend becoming a member of Knot School. Knot School is the only membership-based fraternity and learning resource for learning and sharing knowledge about knots. I hope to see you there.